This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 753 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Each year, I bring on numberFire's Jim Sonis to talk quarterbacks. This year's no different. Jim and I had a conversation about the 2023 quarterback class, and I peppered him with questions about Bryce Young's size, Anthony Richardson's ceiling, Will Levis's overall profile, and more. Jim's had some great hits on the show in the past, and I'm sure his analysis will help you all out during your upcoming rookie drafts too. So sit back, relax, and listen to Jim break down this year's quarterback class. All right, Jim, so we do this episode each year, but for anyone who hasn't listened to this episode in the past, you do an article on numberFire.com where you analyze that particular year's draft class to find which quarterbacks are statistically superior. So can you talk through that study and sort of the things that you're looking for?
Yeah, basically I want to find what things we can quantify and what quantifiable things matter when looking at a player's collegiate resume, because obviously the film stuff matters. Scouts are actually pretty good at what they do, honestly. You look at like hit rates of quarterbacks based on draft capital, they're a lot better than what we give them credit for. So film does matter, but I want to look at the stats and decide which of these numbers matter. And to me, efficiency stats matter, experience matters, like number of games you had, 10 plus pass attempts, and your age, because age is kind of like an indicator of talent. Like, you forced your way on the field right away and you played a lot of games. That's an indicator of talent. Whereas if you're older, waiting to get your first shot, can't quite crack through, it means that you weren't better than the same guys in your depth chart. And that can be kind of a red flag, which is why age and experience are both pretty important things within the model. So they might sound like afterthoughts, but they definitely do matter. And if you combine those things together, you can get a decent quarterback model. I've got it since 2010. It looks at all quarterbacks invited to the combine. There have been 12 first-round quarterbacks who have ranked inside the top 10 in numberFire's expected points model in 1/3 of their qualified season. So 12 out of, I think it's like 33 or 45 quarterbacks in that time, but I should actually know the number, but it's 12 quarterbacks in that sample. Those 12 quarterbacks in my pre-draft model, on average, were in the 86th percentile. So that is not including draft capital. 86th percentile there, looking at just their statistical resumes. Whereas the guys who were less successful first-round picks, they were in the 63rd percentile, so 86 versus 63rd. It's a pretty big gap. Yeah. So you can have a Josh Allen who hits from the 34th percentile. You can have a Baker Mayfield who busts from the 99th percentile, but on average, it can give you a good idea of who will be good in the NFL. So I think on the whole, looking at collegiate resumes do matter. Draft capital matters more, but I think adding this in can be pretty helpful too.
I think if we were to focus on this draft class, I think that most people would agree that this is definitely a better draft class at the quarterback position than what we saw last year. It seems like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are the top guys in the class at this point. Maybe something changes over the next month. Maybe we see, an Anthony Richardson jump up there. But do your numbers agree with that? And then which one of those two guys out of CJ Stroud and Bryce Young do you tend to favor? Because I feel like it's a 50-50 split with people right now.
Yeah, I do think that these two are definitively the top two. I would say they're in a tier of their own, and I would say they are the top tier. And if you look at like past first-round picks, they both grade out as being good relative to just first-round picks. So looking at my pre-draft model, again, no draft capital in there, Stroud ranks in the 93rd percentile among all guys invited to the combine since 2010. Bryce Young, 87th. So both those above the average for successful first-round quarterbacks, which is a good thing for sure. I think it makes a lot of sense. Stroud, last year, his total QBR was 87.7. That's a good number because factors in sacks, it factors in rushing, factors in schedule. Stroud, 87.7 there, which is actually a step down from what he was as a redshirt freshman. And I think that it was cool to see Stroud do that with losing Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. He basically didn't have Jackson Smith and Jigba for the entire year either. So he still had talent. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. should be a high-end pick next year, but losing 3 future first rounders effectively and still being good, I think is huge. And you saw that you could do it, creating off schedule against Georgia. It's important not to overweight one game, but that was a game against the best defense in football, the 2-time national champions, and he did the thing people didn't think he could do. He's young, decently experienced, he's very efficient. Those are the boxes you want to check. So I have Stroud number 1. Young does check those boxes as well. He also lost talent. Jamison Williams, Johnny Mechie left, and didn't have the best offensive line the past couple of years either, and he still played very well. He can make some magic when things break down, which is encouraging to me. You want to see guys in adverse situations thrive, and he did do that. So I prefer Stroud. He's a bit younger, doesn't have the size concerns, but both these guys are very fun. I do think that they are both good relative to first-round picks and in a tier of their own for this year.
Let's talk about those size concerns. I think that that's sort of like a huge separator for people, especially when it comes to fantasy football, because we've seen, Kyler Murray be someone who's fine in fantasy football for the most part, but maybe the durability isn't there. Maybe we are questioning that side of things a little bit. Do you have those concerns for Bryce Young? And is that sort of like the key differentiator for you between Stroud and Young?
Yeah, I mean, if you made them the same size, it'd probably be Bryce Young as like the top guy, just because I think the ability to create when the Brown stuff hits the fan is very valuable. So yeah. I like Young a lot from that perspective. I think the key reason that it matters is because the NFL thinks it matters. And again, scouts are actually very good at what they do. I want to give them full respect for what they do. And if you look at my post-draft model, there is a pretty big drop-off between being the first overall pick, second overall pick, and stuff like that. Like, it's a gradient. It's not linear from one pick to the next. So the further he falls down the board, to me, that means the higher are the odds that he busts. So I care about it from that perspective because the NFL cares, and again, they're good at what they do. So I care about it. I don't care about it to the extent where I would push him into the same tier as Richardson or Levis, but I think that does really kind of break the tie for me between him and CJ Stroud.
So speaking of that draft capital stuff, if Bryce Young were to go 101, would that change your opinion between, or your model's opinion between Stroud and Young?
It would probably put, actually, I could put it in, but
yeah, I did. Yeah, this is something that wasn't in the show sheets or anything. I'm just curious based on what you just said about the draft capital.
Let's just do this right here. So if I make CJ Stroud the second overall pick and I make Bryce Young the first overall pick, the post-draft model would favor Young by a bit. Okay. So that would matter. I might still go Stroud personally, but it would definitely make it a lot tougher. Just that's a personal preference kind of thing. But I think that having him go first overall be a really big endorsement of Bryce Young from the NFL, which is kind of what you want there.
Yeah. So Stroud goes 101. We feel very, very good about Stroud. But if Bryce Young goes 101, then there's more of a conversation there.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So from a fantasy football perspective, Anthony Richardson is very, very intriguing. His passing numbers weren't that great, but we know the rushing component can really make quarterbacks successful in fantasy football. And he's basically the most athletic quarterback that we've just ever seen. I mean, period. So do you think that there are valid concerns with his passing, or do you think that some team can work with him and the rushing upside is just so immense and the athleticism is just so great that he could even be considered the 101 from a quarterback perspective, I guess the number with a QB1 within this draft class from a fantasy perspective?
I think both. I think it can be a concern, but he can still be in the consideration for 101 in terms of fantasy. That might feel weird because it sounds like, if there's a risk with passing, if a guy's not a good passer, probably not going to get a long string in the NFL. But I think that the question is, do you want to focus on floor or ceiling? And I play a lot of DFS, so I care about ceiling. And, the payout structure in Dynasty is also that where you should be gunning for first place. You should shoot for the upsides. I think that the upside justifies it. Looking at my model, Richardson ranks in the 36th percentile of my pre-draft model, which is pretty low. But if you're looking for guys who have been first round picks, lower ranked in the model, and who have paid off, they have the physical traits that Richardson has. Josh Allen, athletic, has a big arm. Same for Richardson. Carson Wentz, somewhat of a hit down there. Ryan Tannehill, kind of same thing. Both those guys were lower in my model, though, than Richardson. I think that's worth noting because they were older. So he does check the boxes you want for a guy to be a successful first-round pick despite not being viewed well by the model. And the rushing is valuable in the NFL, too, not just for fantasy. I think that's an important thing to note is it's not just for fantasy, but the NFL should want guys who do what he does, too. So I think that's important to note. So really, for Richardson, it's kind of just, it's a range of outcomes kind of thing where the odds that he busts are high, and that's fine. That we can acknowledge that while still saying that he's a really fun player. He has just 14 games with 10-plus pass attempts in college. The average for the successful first-round picks is 33.3, so 20 almost games fewer than them. He's a bit older than Stroud and Young, like a tiny bit older, so it's not like he's Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, these super young guys who he didn't have a ton of experience. He is a little bit older, but he seems to understand playing quarterback really well. His sack rate in college was very low, in part because he was athletic, so he could get out of sacks, but also he was smart. He got rid of the ball. So you look at like his numbers on 3rd and 6, like his adjusted yards per attempt was terrible, but it's because he got flushed out of the pocket, had to throw the ball away a lot. And I think that throwing the ball away rather than taking sacks and throwing picks is actually a pretty good thing. And so the traits matter. I think the upside here is huge. The bust rate is high, and that does matter. But again, I think we should be okay taking on risk if the trade-off is a massive, massive ceiling, and he has that. I think I would still go if I had the 101 and needed a quarterback, or if Bijan's gone or whatever. I think that I would probably go Young and Stroud above Richardson, but I can't push back on anyone who wants to flip those around. I think that's fully justifiable.
Yeah, the way that I've kind of been viewing it is if you're in a super flex league, you might want to look at safety a little bit more than if you're in a one quarterback league, right? You want that floor, you want that longevity at the quarterback position, so you don't have to worry about that position. Even if Stroud and Young are more like low-end QB1s or something throughout their career as opposed to like a Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen type player, I do think that looking at that safety makes plenty of sense, especially pre-draft, because right now, while we're recording this, we have no idea if Richardson is going to go in the top 5 or the top 10,
Sure.
And if he does slip, then that obviously switches the way that you view him in your model, and it just switches his hit rate a little bit as well. And so I do think, though, if you're in a one quarterback league, swing for the fences.
And like the downside of a bust in a one quarterback league is a lot lower because it's a lot easier to replace guys there. So I think that like the upside matters more, but the floor also matters less. So it kind of combines to make him a lot better in that format.
Yeah, you're also in a rookie draft. Whenever you're drafting in a single quarterback league, the opportunity cost is completely different. If you're taking Anthony Richardson over a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud or even a Jackson Smith and Jigba, then that's a pretty big opportunity cost. But if you're in a single quarterback league and you're taking him over second round rookie picks, it's not that big of a deal if he doesn't work out. So it's totally fine if you want to go, I think, if you want to go Anthony Richardson, QB1 and single quarterback. I still think as you do, it's still totally fine if you want to do it in a super flex league, but there's just a lot more volatility to do that in the super flex format. Another quarterback who has questionable passing is Will Levis. He seems to have the raw tools, but the numbers really weren't there in college. But many are still interested because he could be maybe this like Josh Allen type. That's sort of the way that people are viewing, those raw tools. But what are you seeing? What's your model seeing?
Yeah, I think that the key difference between Allen and Levis, and the reason why I can't make Allen or Levis have a comp of Allen, is that Allen is a lot younger, 2 years younger coming out than Levis is right now. So what that means is Josh Allen was finishing up his second year in the NFL at the age that Will Levis is right now. And it's a lot harder for me to expect a guy to suddenly fix his mechanics, become a great thrower when that's the case. Also with Will Levis, he's not super experienced. He was at Penn State, had to transfer because they preferred Sean Clifford. That's not a perfect thing because obviously Justin Fields transferred because of Jake Fromm. So it's not perfect. But like the coaches picked Sean Clifford over Will Levis, and at some point that probably matters. So when you add in the age and the lack of experience, Levis actually winds up being, if he's a first-round pick, which I assume he will be, he would be the lowest-ranked first-round pick in my model dating back to 2010. Lower than Tannehill, lower than everyone else. So I think that's actually why Tannehill and Wentz are better comps, better optimistic comps for Will Levis, because both those guys were older coming out. They weren't as experienced. Levis would actually be the third oldest first-round pick at quarterback since 2010. Only guys older, Brandon Weeden and Kenny Pickett. So, like, he's old, and I think that people don't talk about that as much as they should. You can point to the injuries he had this year, the talent he lost with Wan'Dale Robinson being gone, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator, leaving. But if you look at last year, the year everyone points to for Levis, his total QBR still would have been below average for a first-round pick. So I feel like, to me, the age factor is why I can't comp him to Josh Allen. I think that pushes him more towards, again, on the optimistic side, Carson Wentz, Ryan Tannehill. If you're looking for more pessimistic comps, he fits kind of the same mold as Christian Ponder and EJ Manuel, but both those guys were actually more experienced than Levis coming out.
So in your model, without draft capital inputted, is Anthony Richardson looking better than Will Levis?
Yeah, he is. He's like like Richardson is in like probably like the 26th percentile of first round picks if he winds up going there. He is very similar. Like he's almost the exact same as Josh Allen in my model. If you want a Josh Allen comp, it's actually Anthony Richardson more so than Will Levis because again, the age is there. He had a better QBR last year because it factors in sacks. Levis took a ton of sacks. Maybe because he was hurt, maybe because the offensive system was stupid, which I think it was at Kentucky. That's a very fair criticism. But Richardson is like, not like carbon copy Josh Allen in the model, but he's a lot closer than Levis is.
So we have this big four at quarterback, generally speaking. Maybe a big two and then these other two, or maybe a big two and then one, however you want to view it. But then there's Hendon Hooker, who's been rising in these mock drafts. But he's generally more of sort of an afterthought within this class, after those big four quarterbacks. Do you think that he's being overlooked a little bit within this class in general?
Not really. It comes down to age again because he's old. If you were watching during the college football playoffs, people just making fun of Stetson Bennett relentlessly for his age, grandpa and stuff like that. He's actually just a tiny bit older than Hendon Hooker. Let's say hypothetically the Eagles don't sign Marcus Mariota. They draft Hendon Hooker in like the fourth or third or whatever round. He's older than Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is about to get his second contract, and he's younger than Hendon Hooker. So I think that's a downside. His offense at Tennessee is pretty gimmicky, so I would be shocked if he went the first round. I would say, though, it's not to dismiss what Hooker did in college, because to his credit, he played well. He took advantage of the gimmicks, and not every quarterback can do that. Any team can run a gimmicky offense, and they just ran it really well. His total QBR, 89.4, that ranks tops in this class. He has 38 games in college with 10-plus pass attempts, and if you look at him at Virginia Tech when he first played, he was efficient immediately. So it's not a Levis situation where he had to transfer to play. He was already playing and playing very well, but then transferred to a bigger school, a school where he'd get more attention, which he has. So I think the age stuff is the reason why he's unlikely to be a big needle mover, and the gimmicky offense stuff matters too, but he did play well. So I don't think he's an afterthought in Superflex leagues, but it's hard for me to get super jazzed or to expect him to go with a lot of draft capital.
Let me ask you one off-the-cuff question that's not something that I had sent, pre-show. But I'm curious about this because let's say Will Levis goes mid-first, just 15th overall, something like that. And then let's say that Hooker goes in the second. In your rookie draft then, when you figure where these guys would be drafted, because, Will Levis would be a mid-first rounder more than likely in a Superflex rookie draft, maybe towards the late, but then Hooker's probably going to be a mid-second round pick. Is that more attractive to you when you consider that value for Hooker versus Levis in the first?
So the draft capital thing that I use in my model is they use a draft capital chart to grade trades, not the Jimmy Johnson chart, but the other chart. I use that chart to assign values so I can get a non-linear fall off between picks. If you look at the 15th overall pick, that's still worth a lot more draft capital than a mid-second, and I think that's a pretty good indicator. You don't see a lot of non-first-round picks who are successful in the NFL, who get a lot of chances in the NFL, so I would still favor Levis there over Hendon Hooker, but the smaller that gap becomes, the more willing I am to consider it. And it's not just because of Levis, it'd be because that means the NFL is endorsing Hendon Hooker, which matters.
Yeah.
So I would need that gap to be a bit smaller or for Levis to fall outside the first round. Then I'd have that discussion, but it's at least a consideration just because I want that signal the NFL thinks Hendon Hooker is good because I trust them more than I trust myself.
Yeah, makes total sense. All right, so the last question I have for you, for those of us who are in these dynasty Superflex leagues, because I think that only those quarterbacks we just talked about in single quarterback leagues, even Hooker is probably not even a thought for a lot of people at this moment in single quarterback leagues. But if you're in a Superflex league, are there any cheap dart throw quarterbacks that could be flying completely under the radar in this class? Maybe someone who could just appreciate in value from year 1 to year 2, who could go day 2, day 3, what have you. Someone who we're really just drafting, not because we think that he's going to be this ultra producer, but maybe in year 2 we could get a second round rookie pick for him or something like that.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking for like a Brock Purdy, I think that's kind of like the mold you're looking for here. Brock Purdy coming out was very experienced at Iowa State. Didn't have the best efficiency numbers. He was pretty good as a freshman, but then kind of tailed off from there. But then went in the 7th round. I think the guy who best fits that mold is Max Duggan out of TCU, and I need to see where he goes in the draft because there is no buzz around this guy, which is a big red flag. Because again, what the NFL says matters. Like Kellen Moore coming out of college was graded very highly by my prospect model, and he could be Kellen Moore. I don't know. But my model does like him a lot. It actually has Duggan in the 92nd percentile before the draft, which is aggressive, right behind CJ Stroud. But that's why we factor in draft capital. That's why it matters. Right. Duggan, not well regarded by big boards. That, again, does matter. But looking at his resume, 46 games with 10-plus pass attempts. He's only 22.1 years old on draft day, and that's a really good combination. That is Brock Purdy-esque in that regard. My model does not know he got benched entering this year. Doesn't know TCU wanted to not use him. So I think that matters in terms of like, if I'm going to ding Levis for getting, transferring to avoid Sean Clifford, I should ding Duggan for the same thing here. My model does not know that because, again, he's young and very experienced. So it doesn't realize that happened, but he's a little slender. He did run a 4.5 240, so I like that. I think that's kind of fun. So Duggan's the one guy I would look to. Like if the NFL puts a lot of faith in him, that would get my attention really fast. Other one is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He ranks in the 69th percentile on my model, so just a bit behind Hooker. He's also older, not quite as old as Hooker. I think he's closer to this. Yeah, he's a little bit younger than Will Levis, actually. He's 23.5, Levis 23.8. So a little bit younger than Levis, very experienced as well. 47 games of 10-plus pass attempts. He, like Duggan, had a great 40-yard dash, great 10-yard split. His broad jump was good. So if either Duggan or Dorian Thompson-Robinson were to go high, it would get my attention. And by high, I mean 3rd or 4th round. I don't think there's any chance they go before that. But if they do get any draft capital tied to their names, I'll be very interested because they're very athletic. They're each other's top comps on Mock Draftable in terms of athleticism. Another top comp for Duggan is Jamal Williams. His is Zeke Elliott. And another top comp for DTR is Jamal Williams. So if the quarterback thing doesn't work out, running back Max Duggan, running back Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
Jim, thanks so much for hopping on as usual. I really, really appreciate it. For those of you who are not following Jim, you can find him on Twitter at Jim Sannes. That's JimSannes. And check out his work and his podcast over on numberFire.com. You can find me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. And as usual, don't forget to check out this year's Late Round Prospect Guide, which is available right now for $14.99 over on LateRound.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you later in the week.